Welcome to this episode of the Home and Energy Chats. My name is Heather Chandler, and I am the owner and publisher of the Green and Healthy Maine Homes magazines. And each episode, we chat with industry experts to help you learn about building healthy, efficient, and sustainable homes here in Maine. And I am very excited to have two special guests with us today to talk about some efforts that are underway here in Maine to reduce construction waste by encouraging deconstruction and creating markets for previously used building materials. We've written about this topic a couple of times in recent issues of the magazine and had great interest in this. So I know that people are really excited to learn about the efforts that you're both involved with here in Maine, and so thrilled to have you join us today. So before we start officially, I would like to share a special thank you to our webinar sponsor, Royal River Heat Pumps. They are a locally owned and operated company that is nationally recognized for heat pump excellence and is 100% committed to the highest standards of quality installations, services, practices, and customer satisfaction. So you can learn more about them at royalriverheatpumps.com. And a little bit about us. Green and Healthy Maine Homes is dedicated to inspiring healthy, efficient, and future-ready Maine homes. In addition to these chats, we also publish a quarterly magazine. You can see some recent covers here. We produce an annual home show that takes place in the spring in South Portland, and we just launched our Green Home and Design Awards program, which is happening in early November this year. So you can learn more about all of these things on our website at greenmainehomes.com. And now it is my pleasure to introduce our panelists. Megan Mansfield-Pryor is a waste management climate policy advisor with the Governor's Office of Policy, Innovation, and the Future. In this role, she supports state policy and programs related to materials management, waste, and climate. She also leads the newly formed Maine Deconstruction Network, which we are going to learn more about today. And prior to joining GoPIF, Megan was an environmental specialist with Maine DEP. She holds a master's in policy, planning and management, and a bachelor's in environmental planning and policy from the University of Southern Maine. So welcome, Megan.
Thank you.
And Danny Salomon is the founder and principal of Second Story Builders, a mission-driven business in Midcoast Maine that is committed to reducing construction waste and advancing circular construction practices by offering deconstruction services, reclaimed material sales, and design and build project delivery that prioritizes the use of salvage. Through Second Story, Salomon provides hands-on training for youth and local residents, cultivating the next generation of builders in sustainable construction practices. Super excited to hear from you, Danny. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having me.
Great. And a reminder that, again, if you do have any questions for our panelists, please feel free to add them using the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our best to get to them today. So at this point, let's turn it over to Megan, who's going to give us a big picture of what's going on in Maine.
Great. Thank you so much, Heather. And Maggie, could you go to the next slide? So I will also note that I'm in the process of transitioning back to DEP, but made these slides while working at GoPIF, and I'm very happy to say that the Deconstruction Network will be coming with me to DEP, so we will still be continuing hosting meetings, and I've got my contact information at the end, so please keep in mind that you're welcome to join. So next slide, please. So I was brought to GoPIF to form a task force that brought waste and materials into our climate action plan. If you're not familiar with our climate council, these are all the permanent working groups and technical and equity subcommittee that help ensure that we're looking at climate action from all different angles and thinking about equity in our recommendations, as well as using the most recent scientific and technical data. Next slide, please. We have 4 big goals in Maine Won't Wait. We want to reduce emissions, strengthen resilience, create jobs and economic prosperity. And again, that equity lens, bring climate action to all Maine people. So we're not just recommending things that may be out of budget reach for some people, but thinking about all different people. Next slide, please. These are the high-level strategies in Maine Won't Wait. which I welcome you to read. There's a version of it online. You can access it along with our dashboard on progress. There's tons of fantastic information, but today I'm just going to talk about the building recommendations for circular construction. Next slide, please. These are the two recommendations in Maine Won't Wait that focus on embodied carbon and salvage materials. The first one is really focused on municipalities, so encouraging municipalities to take action to keep demolition debris out of landfills. If we had this to do over again, I would probably write this we would probably have a little bit of a longer time frame there, but basically the concept is to first require a permit for demolition because not all communities do, and then enabling a time delay so it gives people time to get in there and salvage materials, and for the property owner to explore other options beyond demolition in that time frame. We also have an ambitious recommendation as part of our lead by example goals to require large commercial and state-funded buildings to be designed for deconstruction and reuse by 2030. And the impetus behind that is that if you look at buildings from a life cycle perspective and you're looking at embodied carbon, the total global warming potential of a building can be reduced by up to 88% if the building is designed for reuse, because you're preserving all those materials and the embodied carbon in them. Typically, most recycling is really grinding up the materials and using it in a beneficial manner, but you lose the real material value that comes with reuse. Next slide, please. And a snapshot of our consumption-based emissions. This graph on the right comes from a 2024 study that EPA did for all the northeastern states, but we were fortunate to work a little bit more closely with them. So they did a deep dive on Maine's emissions. There's a lot more data in the report, which is linked to in my slides here, and is a really fantastic resource if you're curious about this stuff. We've made really good progress on reducing our territorial emissions with clean energy and energy efficiency. And it's likely that as we continue to make those gains, our embodied carbon is going to be of more interest. So you can see in the blue line there, that is our consumption-based emissions, and it's quite a bit higher than our territorial emissions. And there are a lot of things that we can do to bring those down. And basically anything that preserves materials can help reduce those emissions. Next slide, please. And emissions, after all, are global. So if we think it's important to do both. So the consumption-based emissions inventory is really complementary to our sector-based. If you look at things from a sector-based perspective, you can see that waste is a very small % of our overall emissions. But if you take a step back and you look at things from a systems perspective and you look across sectors and territories at emissions generated from resource extraction, you can see you get a very different view, and the materials provisioning is actually a really large portion of emissions. And I will say this graph is outdated. It's from 2006, and more recent data at the global level, the Global Resource Outlook 2024, which is a report put out by the United Nations Environment Program, shows that emissions from materials at the global level are closer to 55% of all emissions at a global level. So it really suggests that the time is now to start thinking about how we're using our materials. And construction and demolition in particular are really big drivers of those emissions because it's such a massive amount of material. It's about a third of all the resources that get extracted every year from the planet, and it produces about a third of the world's waste just as a sector. Next slide, please. There's a lot of good material that we're throwing out. So just one snapshot here. If we were deconstructing buildings, we could have enough material to build about 100,000 new homes based on the average amount of material recovered. This is from one study, and I suspect that it might even be more material, but I think Danny's going to dive more into the specifics of how much can be recovered from an average building. But on average, it's about 41 trees that it takes to build a home. So it just makes sense to recover that material if we can. Next slide, please. This is a graph from Architecture 2030, and they're looking ahead to try to predict specific trends. And based on their prediction and our current trends, they anticipate that embodied carbon is actually going to be a greater source of overall emissions than our direct emissions from burning energy, from producing energy, burning fuels in the future than our direct emissions. So that now is really the time to start thinking about embodied carbon more closely and making changes in the way we're handling things so that we can bring those emissions down. Next slide, please. You may have seen this quote before. The greenest building is one that's already built. This is from Carl Elefante. He was past president of the American Institute of Architects, and he just came out with a great book called Going Zero, Decarbonizing the Built Environment on Our Path to Our Urban Future. And it focuses on both operational and embodied carbon, but the big takeaway for him is that we should really be focusing on adaptive reuse and ensuring that we're keeping materials in use, because no matter how sustainably you build a new building, you're always going to have that large lost embodied carbon footprint if you're not reusing the materials. Next slide, please. And salvage materials are ultra low carbon. If you look at even a bio-based low carbon material that's very sustainably sourced, still has a resource extraction footprint that you don't necessarily have from salvage materials. It's all that resource extraction, the harvesting, the processing. A lot of that just doesn't come when you're salvaging materials. And in addition, the older trees were just better quality. They were more rot resistant, stronger, tighter grain. You can see the picture there, the snapshot of the two pieces of lumber side by side. It's a marked difference in quality. So it's a way that can be boosting the market. So if there are procurement policies that specifically recognize salvage materials, typically low carbon or low embodied carbon are seen in procurement policies, but really being specific about salvage, whether it's a business or a governmental entity, can really help boost the markets and provide more demand and more workforce development to make more of these salvage materials, recover more materials so that people can buy them when they want them, and that we have people out there salvaging the materials to provide the market feed. Next slide, please. And it's also flexible. There are lots of different ways that deconstruction is happening. Danny will give some examples. These particular pictures are from Deconstruction Dave, who you would know if you're in the industry, but he works with or founded Reuse Consulting and has done many deconstructions over the course of his career. And these are just a couple examples: post-fab panels where you cut off sections, entire walls, entire roofs or rooms. Another technique that they're doing is taking a building apart and labeling piece by piece so that they can very easily reassemble the entire building in another location if it just needs to be moved, or deconstructing in segments, so cutting off unique features like a turret room or an entire room. That little blue building there is an example. So there's lots of different ways it can be done. Next slide, please. And if you haven't looked at LEED version 5 already, just a quick snapshot, you'll see that there's a lot more focus on embodied carbon. There's more credits for reuse. Planning for zero waste operations is required. And they also have a lot of considerations for the community, for equity, for health and well-being. So there's some changes there that really support salvage. Next slide, please. And technology solutions are coming. This is not up to scale or out yet, but this is a building that's a tool that's in development using AI to reprocess lumber. And the machine at capacity could support multiple businesses across a region. And we basically take a lot of the labor out of repurposing wood. So it takes all the metal out, does a quality check, so it's immediately ready for reuse in a new project. Next slide, please. A quick snapshot for the carbon emissions, just so you get a sense of what I'm talking about. In 2022, about 600,000 tons of construction and demolition debris was generated in Maine, and only about 2% got diverted from landfill. So like I said, a lot of recycling is beneficial use within a landfill. But reusing, where you really you keep that embodied carbon, just 50,000 tons of wood reuse is equivalent to reducing emissions from almost 30,000 gas-powered vehicles for a year. So if we just had the systems in place to keep more of that material in use, that's just a quick snapshot to give you a sense of the scope of the embodied carbon that we're talking about with materials. And most of the construction and demolition debris, although we use that term, it's really demolition debris. Only about 10% is scrap from new construction projects. And just in the interest of time, I guess we'll skip next slide, please. The other thing to think about when comparing deconstruction versus demolition, deconstruction is the norm, demolition, is the norm. But while it's often assumed that deconstruction is much more expensive, it's important to think over the entire life cycle of the project, because you also get revenue from deconstruction. The materials are valuable and can be resold. There's a tax credit, whereas demolition is never going to be anything but an upfront cost. And a skilled crew that really knows what they're doing in a deconstruction can move pretty quickly. So it's not necessarily as big a difference as people might think in terms of cost and time. Next slide, please. And deconstruction is a triple bottom line. You have social benefits, you have economic benefits, you have environmental benefits. There's a great study out of Cornell University looking at the impact of deconstruction in particular that found that if they were shifting half to 3/4 of their demolitions to deconstructions, it could really reshape an entire sector of their economy because there's so much potential there for jobs creation, for material recovery and reuse, as well as with demolition, you end up with even when some of the hazards are mitigated beforehand, there's still risk of asbestos, lead, other contaminants getting into the air and the water. So deconstruction is a much safer alternative because you're manually taking things apart. You're not having those particulates spread into the environment. Next slide, please. And the workforce development potential. I'm almost at the end of my time, so I'm probably going to skip this one, but there's a lot of really fantastic stuff happening. And I know Danny is going to talk about his internship program, and that's just a great example. But there's many, many more out there in other states where there's nonprofits, there's small businesses that are creating jobs, and there's a lot of great work happening. These pictures are from the Rebuilding Exchange in Chicago. And a lot of these positions not only can be a pathway to employment for people who might otherwise have a hard time finding work, but they tend to have more varied skills. A lot of the jobs in disposal, whether it's operating heavy equipment to demolish a home or working in a landfill, they're not really pleasant jobs. You don't really gain a lot of skills, whereas with something like deconstruction, you're learning a wide variety of skills, often the same skills that you would need to build something to deconstruct. So it's really more like cross-training, and it gives people great work experience and confidence. Next slide, please. Like I said, the barriers to reuse, the social norms, it's just kind of what people expect is a dumpster. All the materials go in there. Maybe it gets sent for recycling, but a lot of it doesn't really get reused in the same way. So there was a study that was done looking at the true cost of landfilling, and the goal was to find out what the cost per ton of disposal would be if we considered the entire cost of landfilling materials and looking at one construction and demolition debris. I believe this was in Wisconsin where the study was done, but there's a link in the bottom of the slide that will confirm that. But they estimated the direct emissions from this one landfill to be over $20,000 per year. But when you consider the upstream emissions from the materials that were landfilled instead of being reused, they found that the cost jumps to over $2 million a year if you include those consumption-based emissions. And often disposal fees are just not that high, so it's not really a deterrent for people. So for example, in Maine, our disposal tip fees in 2022 for demolition debris were about $96 a ton, but some were as low as $17 a ton. So it's easy to throw things away, it's convenient, and that's the way the system is designed. So that is a barrier to change. It's just that people tend not to think of deconstruction, even though it has so many benefits and so much potential value. Next slide, please. Just love this quote. It speaks for itself. We recycle bottles but throw warehouses, and if you think about it, it doesn't make sense. Next slide, please. There is funding available. So the DEP Waste Diversion Grant is for both public and private entities. So businesses are eligible to apply. Any kind of project that's going to keep waste out of the landfill is eligible through this grant. And we also have, through the Community Resilience Partnership grants, there is now eligibility for a lot of different waste recommendations that were in the climate plan. So that includes salvage, deconstruction, and designing for reuse and deconstruction. And these are municipal grants, but there is room for partnership grants too. So in some cases, organizations can work with the municipality to apply for grant funding. And there's some great project ideas there at these websites linked here. Next slide, please. And the Deconstruction Network, which Heather mentioned at the beginning, this is a relatively newly formed network, but we've been meeting monthly, having really wonderful expert guest speakers join us. And we're brainstorming, thinking about ideas to move deconstruction forward in Maine and grow it as a practice. We're thinking a lot about workforce development, affordable housing, and education outreach. So I welcome as many people as want to join. We'd love to have your participation. Maine is also part of the Buy Clean partnership with the U.S. Climate Alliance, looking for collective opportunities to procure low carbon building materials. So we're trying to make sure that we focus on, holistically about that. So I'm trying to make sure that we're thinking about salvage and all these low embodied carbon material conversations too. And I think that the recommendations, now that we have them in our climate plan, the fact that we're talking about embodied carbon and designing buildings for deconstruction in our climate action plan also has some impact on getting people to think about it a little differently as a climate action. Next slide, please. So there's some links here. There's another fantastic organization called Build Reuse, as well as the Northeast Carbon Leadership Forum. These are some other groups that really focus a lot on deconstruction and materials reuse for all sorts of different sectors. There's my email if you want to join the Deconstruction Network. So there's lots of opportunities to get involved and learn more about deconstruction. And I think I can end there and pass it off to Danny, because the rest of my slides are mostly like, yeah, suggested climate actions. It's all focused on reusing materials, tools that you can use to measure upstream emissions, and then links to read our climate action plan and stay involved with the Climate Council. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Megan. And I know there's a lot of great information and links there, so we will send a follow-up email to everyone who's registered, and we can include those links if you did miss anything that you want to follow up with there. And before we jump into Danny's presentation, just a reminder that if you do have questions, feel free to add them to the Q&A feature at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our very best to get to all of them. So Danny, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, thank you. So again, I'm Danny Salomon. I am the owner and principal of Second Story Builders, which is a pretty young company here in Midcoast, Maine. We're a mission-driven business. We're an LLC that's committed to reducing construction waste and advancing circular construction practices in our area. So I'll kind of go through what that looks like and how we're structuring it. But Megan did a good job of sort of explaining what circular construction might mean. So typically, this is what happens to buildings at the end of their life cycle. They get torn down. There are all kinds of health hazards associated with demolition, all kinds of research that shows that, even if you are spraying the building with a hose, it is not preventing the particulates from getting into all kinds of parts of the neighborhood. And deconstruction looks very different. Again, Megan sort of highlighted this, but it's, a great team building activity. There's a lot of opportunities to learn about the trades. Taking a house down or a building down is like putting one up in reverse. So there's, great educational and workforce development potential in deconstruction. And then obviously material recovery. Many deconstruction projects, excluding the foundation, can recover somewhere between 80 and 90% of materials from ending up in the landfill for reuse or recycling. Certain cities have sort of paved the way by getting deconstruction, not only sort of the infrastructure in place, but also policy as well. The first deconstruction ordinance passed in the United States was passed in Portland, Oregon. So if Portland, Oregon could do it, maybe Portland, Maine could be next in line. But this was a pretty recent ordinance. It was passed in 2016 because the city of Portland had such a robust reuse culture already, and also some deconstruction businesses that were in place. It was really successful passing this policy, so much so that they expanded the mandate to, it was originally passed to mandate houses built before, I think it says it here, 1916, and then they amended it 4 years later because it had proved successful to any house built before 1940. And other cities have started to adopt policies similar to this as well. But it's really important before getting to the policy side to establish that infrastructure, to have deconstruction companies that exist, and to start to get that ecosystem in place. So that is what I'm trying to do with Second Story. Some of the results of their efforts, and this is pretty dated, but since that ordinance, they've saved about 2 million tons of materials from landfills, which is remarkable. And then here's just a sort of a map of how this is spread. So Portland, Oregon sort of being the origin. Other cities that have adopted, and this might be a little dated too, similar deconstruction ordinances, cities with laws in progress, and then states that have some form of construction, demolition, debris, or recycling or reuse policies. So we want to put Maine on this map, and we're in motion right now. I personally learned about deconstruction when I formerly lived in Buffalo, New York. A lot of Rust Belt cities, when they were going through fast track demolition programs in like the early 2000s, basically using taxpayer money to like clear away vacant houses. Deconstruction sort of cropped up in a lot of those cities, and Buffalo was one of them. So this was a mentor of mine, Michael Gaynor. He was the principal and founder, and still is, of Reuse Action in Buffalo. And I worked with him on several projects, and this was just one example, sort of an unusual one. We think about like houses being deconstructed, but we had a pretty innovative way of saving gym floors from getting thrown away from public schools. So we had, so, you know, again, deconstruction, or excuse me, demolition, you know, is pretty straightforward. It's like, how quickly can we kind of crush this structure and like get it into dumpsters and get it off site with a big machine. In the case of deconstruction, you know, you have to sort of innovate and think differently. And so in this case, we were actually able to, just three of us, very quickly cut gym floors, which are sitting on sleepers, so we could actually like easily kind of get it off the slab with a forklift that we could fit through, you know, your standard double door of a gymnasium, palletize all of these sections that we cut, and get it on a semi truck within a day and a half, which was way less time than it would take to actually demolish it. Because demolition, you'd have like 4 or 5 people come in, cut the section small enough that they could hand lift it, and it's really heavy material, it's maple floor, walk it out to the dumpster and throw it away. So I've seen both sides of this, and this is one case where deconstruction, at least the method that I learned from Michael, was actually a lot more efficient, much faster, took less crew members. And so we saved 6 gym floors, which was a total of 60,000 square foot of total flooring. That's enough for 24 homes. It only took 3 people and 1 forklift. It was about 10 to 12 hours per floor. Again, from the time we stepped in the door to the time everything was loaded up on a semi to go back to a store. And it was about a third the time and fewer workers than it would have taken for demo. And again, this is like not always the case, but there are cases where deconstruction is actually more efficient, which is pretty exciting. So we offer deconstruction services. Second Story Builders has been doing a bunch of deconstruction projects. This was the first one that we actually executed at the beginning of this summer. This is a historic home in a historic district in Camden. This was one of the oldest homes actually in Camden, and unfortunately it had to get taken down, but we were able to get in there and do it in a careful manner and salvage a lot of the material. This was part, also, Megan mentioned that I ran an internship this summer. This was the sort of first project that the interns, paid interns, ages 16 to 24, worked on with me. So this is what the deconstruction looked like. Peeling away the layers, getting the sheathing boards off carefully. And again, it's just sort of construction in reverse, working our way down. This was such an old building that the skeleton of it was actually a timber frame, which is really neat. So you can see that there. And then, of course, another thing that we do is we sell these reclaimed materials. So what you're looking at here is pretty much all of the materials that we salvaged. Those are 2 separate piles from that one house, about a 1,500 square foot house with the garage in the back, from Camden. So it's an enormous amount of material. I mean, you can see here. And it's all, you know, beautiful old growth lumber, probably grown on the same property or nearby. You know, boards that you can't find anymore, 16-inch wide, 18-inch wide sheathing boards. And then the last thing that we do, which is a little bit unique, I haven't seen a lot of businesses that do this, but we also offer design build project delivery services that prioritize the use of salvage. And I think this is going to be a really important aspect to our success, because if we only do deconstruction and we're not able to get the materials out there and used in new construction projects, we're just basically doing careful demolition. That's it. So unless we can create a reuse market and get other construction companies and architecture firms to start to incorporate materials that are reclaimed into their efforts, we're just going to be sitting on a lot of materials. So we're trying to pioneer that. We're trying to take on projects where we can showcase the beauty of these materials to the public so that other folks can get excited about it and hopefully start to buy in. So another project that was one of our first was this cafe renovation. This is the Villager Cafe, which is part of the Midcoast Villager, the newspaper in our area. So they own and operate this cafe, and all of the wood components that you see, except the floor, which was the original floor that just sort of resanded and refinished, the tabletops, the bar, the register, the wainscoting, everything you see in this came from a house that we deconstructed about 4 blocks away. And we were trying to think about, interesting ways we could take materials that we would commonly find in these older homes and clean them up and put them into a space like this where you couldn't even tell that it was a reclaimed material. So the wainscoting, for example, was old lath from the plaster and lath walls in that house that we took down. And then we also clad the bar you can see on the left there with lath as well, that we didn't plane, so you could see sort of the before and the after in the same space. The image on the right, where the soft seating is, you can see the cleaned up lath against the wall there. The tabletops were old rafters. The curved bar top was curved lamination with a lot of the sheathing material that came from that house. So again, we were trying to think about interesting ways to incorporate all these different elements you would commonly find. And then the last thing, which is really important to, I think, again, the success of this business and also something I'm really passionate about, is the opportunity that I think deconstruction presents to another problem that we're facing, which is the lack of tradespeople in Maine. We need to train the next generation of young people to participate in the trades and to also participate in sustainable building practices. So we are offering hands-on paid internship opportunities to local youth. We ran a summer internship. I think it was 16 summer interns throughout the summer. And I'm currently running another internship with high school age students who are working with me on the weekends, not only on design build projects with salvage, but also helping run the store to get a little bit of experience with that sort of entrepreneurial effort as well. And so I worked with high school students on that Villager Cafe project. Here's some sort of behind the scenes of us working on those tables, tabletops, cleaning up the lath for the walls, doing installation in the space, etc. And then some images of students working with us on the deconstruction project that I showed before. And then one other really great component, I think, of deconstruction is that there's a lot of history being lost when we tear these houses down, right? So this was the former owner's son who came by and told us a little bit about his father. In the garage on the part of this property, that was sort of his workshop. And he used to be the neighborhood saw sharpener, and was like a really talented craftsman. And we found a receipt from him sharpening a saw. So this is us giving his son the receipt that we found. But we also find, this is on the back of siding, old companies, local companies that existed that provided those materials. Another old company on the tar paper that we pulled off an old structure. And we even found negatives in the wall of a project that we did that I was able to clean and get digitally scanned. These are images from the Korean War, I believe, and remarkably high quality. So there's all this history that we can unpack, which is, again, a really great thing for young people to get exposed to, and they get really excited when we find these things. And you can see the images were so clear that you can even zoom in and see the name on this fellow's uniform. So I did a research project. I formerly worked at the high school doing a hands-on program that also was committed to radical reuse. And during that research project, we looked into how waste was managed within our area. And so looking at a 50-mile radius from our school and all the different transfer stations, we discovered that about 40,000 tons of annual construction and demolition debris get landfilled. And that's the equivalent tonnage of about 667 single-family homes every year. And if you think about the fact that we have a housing problem, this just doesn't add up. It doesn't really make sense. So is there another way forward? So really, this is like the focus right now of the business, is trying to reach out proactively to the construction industry, to folks, to architects, like I said before, design build firms, and to get them to, see these older homes and think about them like this, right? Like, how can we, rather than think to like go to Hammond or go to Home Depot or whatever, think about a house that needs to come down as a potential source of material for a renovation like this, where the lath can be sorted, cleaned up, and used in a really beautiful manner. On the interior, a building even like this was a barn we just took down a couple weeks ago. Doesn't look all that interesting, and maybe the materials don't even look reusable, but this is the stack of material that we got from that one barn. Great sheathing boards, a lot of structural lumber, all in really good shape and ready to be reused. So I'll end it there, and we can move on to questions, I guess.
Thank you so much. That is
Yeah.
amazing what you're doing. And I'm sure lots of people who are watching want to know what your coverage area is. So what region, how far do you reach with your services?
Yeah, great question. So we're staying hyper local. We don't have to travel that far, honestly. We haven't had trouble finding deconstruction projects
Sure.
in our area. There's more interest than we have capacity right now. And like I said before, really like the challenge is creating the full ecosystem, getting we need to pace our deconstruction at the same pace that we're pushing materials out. So right now we don't have that balance yet. But I think by proactively doing projects where we can reuse some of them, and then also finding some sustainably minded design build firms that are willing to work with us on some pilot projects, hopefully we can find that balance in the next year or so.
And what is your hyperlocal region? So what area are you covering?
Really just the Midcoast region. So we've done projects. Our store is based in Union, Maine. So the barn that I just showed, that was in Union, literally like 2 minutes away, like a 2-minute drive away from our facility. We've done a couple projects in Camden, and we're working on a barn. I was just working on it this morning before joining the webinar, in Rockland. So again, we haven't really had to travel far. The project we have coming up after that is in Camden. So again, not, no more than like 30 miles maybe radius from where we're located, something like that.
Great. So this segues into some questions that we received about who is doing this in Maine. So clearly you are. Who else is providing these services in Maine, deconstruction services?
Yeah, so Megan could maybe help answer this question, but I don't think there are really many deconstruction companies. There's certainly an interest in this, but not many deconstruction companies yet. So in the same way that we're training young people, I hope, we can inspire other companies to crop up and we can help train them as well. There is a company, Barn Boards and More, that's in Gardner that occasionally will do deconstruction. But aside from that, Megan, do you know of any other?
No, we have
gigs in Maine?
actually, there have been a couple that that you didn't have capacity for, so we ended up calling on a nonprofit based in Maryland to come up, and unfortunately, that's been the other option so far. The Deconstruction Network is talking about options for training, so there are organizations like Boston Building Resources that will come into a community and do deconstruction trainings. So I think that could be a really good option in addition to what Danny's doing to try to, expand this in other areas of the state and hopefully, inspire some other people to start doing this work, because there's definitely the demand for it. Like Danny was saying, much more than they can handle as one small business.
Yeah, so we're very, very much at the beginning, it sounds like,
Yes.
growing this industry. We did have a question come in about cost, and I know you had a slide that compared deconstruction versus demolition. If you want to say a little bit more about that, what does deconstruction typically cost a homeowner, and when it might be preferred over restoration? That was the second part of their question.
I actually think Danny would be much better to answer that, because I was looking at research studies. He actually does it. So Danny, I think that's better for you to take.
Yeah. So far the cost has not been much of an issue for us. And I would say the discrepancy that was in Megan's slide is it hasn't been quite as significant again on our end. We are trying to make our cost competitive with demolition, and it really depends on the context. So, for example, the historic house that we did in Camden, the site was really tight, so it would have been very challenging. And it's on a heavily trafficked street. A lot of people in the community don't want to see these historic homes getting demolished. So there is that aspect to it. So, just the sort of diplomacy of doing the right thing. So that was a case where the demolition cost was like so much greater because of all of those obstacles. And so when I priced it out, I landed basically exactly where the demolition cost would have been. It wasn't that much different. That's not the case for everything. Again, sometimes deconstruction takes a lot longer, and there's a lot more labor involved. But again, I'm trying to get the cost to be competitive with demolition as much as possible. The other sort of trick that we can use, right now, we are structured as a for-profit. There is a hybrid model that exists out there to have the deconstruction company be a for-profit and to have the store be a nonprofit so that they can accept donations and also provide that enormous tax break that clients could take advantage of to bring the cost down effectively. So that's something that we're interested in exploring pretty soon, especially also since we're focusing so much of our reuse efforts on education. I think there's like other opportunities to having a nonprofit arm be part of our structure, but at the moment we can't offer those incentives just yet. But it hasn't deterred people from paying the cost that we quote them on. So
right. And Megan, you mentioned the Maryland organization. Is that the one that is a nonprofit that does workforce development?
They are one of many, yes. Second Chance. They
Yeah.
work with people who, as I said, they would have a hard time finding employment, often like reentering from a correctional facility, and they give them the workforce training and development. And they so far have done, I think, one deconstruction they finished in Maine, and then I passed them another couple when Danny couldn't take on a project a couple weeks ago. So they are available, but as wonderful as the work is that they are doing, it'd be great to have something more like that in Maine rather
Absolutely.
than calling on an out-of-state company or organization.
Right, and then having all the materials transported to Maryland.
Exactly.
So I think the project you mentioned in Maine is the project that we featured on the cover of our fall issue in Portland.
Peaks Island, yes.
Oh, and Peaks Island. Oh, so they did one in Portland also on the mainland.
Okay, so they've done a couple then.
Yeah. And that the family that decided to work with them, ran the numbers and they were able to benefit from some tax deductions that made it economically advantageous to go with them. So they did a lot of research on it. All right, let's switch to the next question. Someone from Massachusetts asking if there was anybody there that provides these services. It sounds like the closest we know of is Maryland, or is there somebody in Massachusetts?
No, there are several in Massachusetts. It just happened that in this particular instance, there were a couple different entities that were outreach, but there's Boston Building Resources. There's Select Demo Services. Somebody from their company is actually on our deconstruction network and trying to start a nonprofit here focused on deconstruction as well. So if you want to email me, I would be happy to connect you with the few people that I do know in Boston.
Excellent. And we can share your email in the follow-up that we send out so people have that. So Select Demo Network.
Select Demo Services. And
Services.
one of the, I'm not sure if he's the founder, but he's also trying to start a nonprofit. One of the people that works there is on our network and is doing like more like, I think it's more like a soft strip, going in and taking out usable features, but maybe not deconstructing the entire home, but he could certainly provide more information.
And do you know if those organizations in Massachusetts do provide services in Maine? They also hyperlocal?
I think Select Demo does. I don't know about Boston Building Resources, but we are in the process of trying to learn more about, you know, our neighboring state organizations and trying to figure out how we might be able to work with them, or if they can cover some of the demand here while we are still building up our own, you know, markets and workforce.
Right. So on the flip side, are you familiar with builders who are practicing deconstruction? So I know we did a story on Randy Rand, who his company is based in Orono, Our House Design, and he did a deconstruction on a reno he did. I'm curious who else in Maine is doing that? Are you aware?
I'm not. Danny, are you?
No.
I'd love to know them, honestly.
Sounds like it's chicken or egg, so you have to have the market too, right?
Yeah. Yes, you definitely need the markets. Like Danny was saying, they can't just generate tons of material from salvage and then not have an end market for it. So
Yeah,
you need the workforce development, you need the markets.
right. Well, you both are doing such great work on that, so thank you. It's really nice to learn more about what you're doing and hopefully be able to support that a little bit more moving forward. Next question is on for commercial and industrial projects, who would bear the cost of deconstruction? They're asking if it could potentially be similar to extended producer liability, where manufacturers are responsible for end-of-life management of their products by funding collection and recycling systems.
So there, and Danny, I don't feel free to jump in if you want to speak to this one too. I do know the Carbon Leadership Forum of Boston has a couple members that are involved in more of the commercial sector deconstruction. And there are within that a couple limited take back programs, but it's for example, I think it's carpets and tiles, Armstrong and Mohawk. I believe there are certain companies that are doing voluntary takebacks for certain materials. But as far as I know, there is no kind of robust all materials kind of program in place for construction materials. But I suspect that if builders or contractors are talking with the vendors that they're sourcing material from, they might be surprised at what they can work out with getting material salvaged. And I would again be happy to connect them with the person that I know in Boston who's working more on this commercial scale deconstruction, because it is a little bit of a different beast, so to speak, than the residential deconstruction. Very different material streams.
Does the Deconstruction Network have any sort of web presence yet? Is there a resource online yet in process?
Not at the not at the moment. I just transitioned jobs to DEP, and because it's it's state government facilitated network at the moment, we don't really have a lot of or any resources or funding to kind of put development up. But although getting a web page up is one of my goals, or partnering with another entity that maybe has the resources to give it a more robust online presence would be another fantastic option.
Yeah, that's great. So a couple more policy related questions. Would towns need ordinances, or would or could the state mandate deconstruction? So it sounds like we looked at some models where that's happening across the country. Any thoughts on how that might roll out here in Maine?
I think Danny could speak to this one too. I mean, we have the recommendations in our climate plan, but I think, as Danny had mentioned, you want to be really careful with ordinances when we currently lack the markets and the workforce development. So I think there have been a couple of cases which Danny can speak to where a community may have jumped far ahead with passing an ordinance when they didn't have the structures in place. So I think we have a lot of work to do before we would be at the point of mandating, and I wouldn't see that coming from the state. I think that things are better at the local and regional level with this kind of work, and Danny, I'm sure, can add to that.
Yeah, so I mentioned before, Portland, Oregon being the first to pass an ordinance, they had that infrastructure. The second city to do so was Milwaukee, and they didn't have that infrastructure in place, and the ordinance just slowed construction down and really didn't work. So I think there's, that cautionary tale that, you can't jump the gun on policy before you have those things already in motion. But I do think there's, besides an ordinance that mandates deconstruction, there are other things, and Megan and I have talked about this, that could help the effort. So, for example, we're actually working on a housing project right now, a pilot housing project that's going to really, we're going to use as many reclaimed materials as possible, sort of testing to see, what the barriers are through this project. And one is that if you're using reclaimed structural lumber, 2x4s, joists, all these things in a structural manner, they have to get regraded by an engineer or a professional regrader, which can be costly and slow things down. So even if they've held up a building for more than 200 years, and are higher quality. So cities that have moved along with deconstruction have changed those policies within their state. I think Washington State has done so. Oregon has done so. There might be a few others, but this is something that wouldn't, drastically change the way the construction industry operates. It would just create an opportunity for reusable materials to be incorporated into new construction. So that's like one policy that I could see us changing early on, and that would help encourage us to move in the right direction.
Yeah, sounds good.
And I do want to add that the international codes, what does that stand for? ICC, they are looking at a change to incorporate salvaged lumber use into the building codes, the international codes, and that there's going to be a hearing, I believe it's in October of 2026 in Connecticut, and that will be an important meeting. I know that I attended a build reuse conference about deconstruction in August, and that was one thing that they were focused on, is how important it is to change this at the codes level, because that can really enable a lot of change if it's, specifically called out and enabled like that. So I put a link in the chat. I can't share it with the group, but good source of information there.
Great. We can share that in the follow-up. Someone is asking specifically about purchasing reclaimed landscaping and hardscaping materials. Any suggestions on where they might find those in Maine?
I do not know. Danny,
My
do you know?
specialty, I don't know. I'm sorry.
Is that typically part of a deconstruction process? Like, I imagine is there much material in a typical residential home? Maybe like foundations or older homes with stone foundations? Is that typically part of the process?
So a few of the deconstruction projects that we've done, the homeowners actually wanted to reincorporate granite and things from the foundation. So we didn't take those. We just let them reuse them. Generally in the contracts that we create with clients, we don't do any foundational work. So the site worker will come in and handle all of that. So, in terms of stone, that's just been out of our hands. I do know that I've seen the deconstruction companies out in Portland, Oregon will salvage and resell plants and things like that from the landscape, which can actually, make a good amount of money, some of them. So
big
it's
market
not
on
something
plant
we've done
sales.
yet. Yeah. It's not something we've done yet, but yes, there are people out there doing that sort of thing. I'm not sure about in Maine, though.
It sounds like there's so much potential for anyone who's looking to start a business, who's inspired by the work that you're both doing, that there's talk about a huge need.
Yes, and a massive untapped opportunity.
Yep. Let's see. Someone is asking about liability issues for deconstruction volunteers in Maine. How does that play out with your interns? I don't know if that would fall under volunteers since they're paid, but do you work
Yeah,
with
so
volunteers?
again, we're not a nonprofit, so I haven't, had to deal with that. I did previously work for Habitat for Humanity, and I don't personally see any difference there. Anyone who volunteers on the construction sites, whether they be youth or whomever, they're signing a waiver, and that's kind of how that's handled. And like I said, it's not, if you do things properly, it's like construction in reverse. So I don't see why a nonprofit couldn't have volunteers on the site. And of course, you only put people in positions that they can safely handle. So even just having folks help denail boards and process them, I would be very open to having volunteers do things like that. And I don't think there's any great danger um, in having folks help out with that sort of thing. But again, we're just not a nonprofit, so we haven't had any volunteer situations yet.
Okay. Two final questions. Is there a central place where people can find locations in Maine to purchase reclaimed building materials? I know you mentioned the Habitat for Humanity. The Habitat Restores has a network throughout the state where you can purchase some building materials. Is there a list somewhere of other locations that sell reclaimed materials?
There is not. I will say that in my unit at DP Sustainability Unit, we talked for a long time about the value of building a database for reuse, whether it's reclaimed building materials or reclaimed textiles. But it's a matter of staff time and resources, so we don't have that list. But it's a great idea, and if we ever have the time, we would certainly do it. Be a great project for an intern to take on too at a university to
Yeah,
build up a
absolutely.
database. Yeah.
I mean, I have ambitions to have that on our website, to be honest.
Great.
Yeah. So the ones that I know of are folks that we've worked with a little bit, but I don't have a comprehensive list yet. But hopefully at some point. And maybe that's
Well,
something one of my interns could work on.
Yeah.
if
sure.
you do, we would be happy to blast it out and share that broadly. So that leads into the
That'd be
last
great.
question, which is you are both doing such wonderful, inspiring work. And how can we support you? How can people who are watching today, who are interested in helping to expand this market and helping to support your efforts, how can they support your work?
Danny, do you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I would say choose deconstruction if you can over demolition. Spread the word. I think a lot of people don't know that this is an option. I've even had the house that we're about to take down. The folks who were going to demolish it were really sad to think that was like the only option for building new. So they were like, "Is there anything we could do to save it?" And they just did some research and wound up finding us and reached out. So yeah, I think just letting people know that this is an option, that there is an alternative. And encourage folks to consider reclaimed materials. I mean, if you're really sustainably minded in the way that you want to build new, reclaimed materials are like the best option, hands down.
Yeah.
I have a couple suggestions. So what Danny said, definitely getting the word out, I think is really key because so many people just don't think about this as a valid thing. Also consider training. Contracting businesses can consider cross-training employees. Technical education centers could consider this as a valid pathway for training students and young people. And join the Deconstruction Network if you're interested in learning more. That would be fantastic. Thank you.
Excellent. Well, thank you both again so much for being with us today. We are at time. So thank you again to our sponsor, Royal River Heat Pumps, and a special thank you to our webinar producer who's managing everything behind the scenes, Maggie Perkins. If you're interested in checking out past recordings of past chats that we've done, they are all on our website. So you can find those there, greenmainhomes.com. And if you have any questions that we did not get to today, we will be sharing contact information for the panelists along with some links that they shared in the follow-up email. So you could certainly follow up with them later. And you'll see a short survey pop up after the session. We always love your feedback. It helps us come up with ideas for future sessions. So thank you again, Megan and Danny. Thank you so much for sharing your great work and keep it up.
Thanks for having us. Bye.
Thank you, Heather.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.